A couple of things we want to go over in this unit particularly are the core concepts of both Freud's and Adler's psychoanalysis and individual psychology. We're going to look and explore their techniques of psychoanalytic and the Adlerian therapies and discuss childhood experiences, which is a focus of Freud's and psychodynamic theory, and then how that leads into personality development, keeping in mind our biblical stance for some of these theories. While theories in and of themselves are not particularly integrative, we have the opportunity to integrate as Christians. One such scripture I'd like to look at would be Ephesians 5:21. It's stating that we're to be subject to one another. And in that, that brings to mind being mindful or having mindfulness and looking at how we're subject to each other. And as counselors and therapists, we're in a helping profession to come alongside our clients in our best form as believers as well. The core concepts we're looking at in the psychoanalysis or psychodynamic theory with Freud, we're going to look at a couple of definitions before we really get into these concepts, and that is counseling and psychotherapy. And a lot of times these are used synonymously, and there are a few nuances within those definitions, so we want to look at that. Counseling is a professional relationship, and we're empowering the individuals in the therapeutic environment, and it's more of a short-term or goal-oriented process, where with psychotherapy is more structured and gets into deep emotional and psychological issues, and it's covered over a longer span of time. And although they may have similar goals and looking at insights and behaviors and emotional regulation, hopefully personal growth, there's some pieces we want to look at with psychoanalytic therapy and the theory with Sigmund Freud. Excuse me. So let's move into looking at that theory with him. And Freud had some foundational principles that we want to look at. So these core concepts and in his theory, and understanding our clients and guiding interventions. So historically, Freud is considered one of our founders. He's a father of psychology, that we've heard that term for him, and his psychodynamic theory. Looking at psychic determinism, based on Freud's thoughts, it is that all thoughts and feelings and behaviors have a causational root system. So if that happened because something else. And oftentimes we have thought that these things were unconscious, or he thought of these as unconscious, and they may have come from a past into the present with an unconsciousness that the client might have. And again, he approached this as this professional, and kind of where the thought of lying on the couch kind of came from, he was analyzing or looking into this. That nothing that we do is random. You've may have heard the phrase Freudian slips, because of something that's transferred out of unconsciousness. And we're moving one thing into another because of that foundational root cause of the issue. So think of it kind of like a puzzle. So if everything has an action or a thought, and there's a piece, so everything fits together into a bigger picture of this unconscious experience. We have moments, or you've heard times where a child may be at school or daycare, and they call the teacher their mom or their dad or the name of their caregiver. Freud would say this was because they were slipping and it was unconscious, and they were relating or associating that person, transferring that guardian figure for them. And he thought that unconscious motivation in terms of referring to desires and memories that they have had in the past, or even like dream states would have this similar definition. So I will say, be cautious around the dream analysis and any kind of psychoanalysis without the proper training. This isn't something we're going to read in this course or that you got in your undergrad course. It is particular training. And it does go more in depth than what we're talking or looking at in this particular unit or book. As we move on to the psyche and those three parts that Freud talks about frequently, the id and the ego and superego. The psyche that you're reading about, with the id being the instinctual, primitive part that is driven by pleasure or pleasure seeking for gratification. And the ego is the reality principle, right? And it mediates between the id and the superego in the real world, as he would have stated it. And then the superego represents the internalized morals or ideals, so a moral code, as he may have said. So what is good, what is bad, what is right or wrong, and also the superego is driving towards that perfectionism. And we would say we have standards that have been internalized from a parental system or a societal system, and that superego relates to the psychological rewards or punishments. The reward from the superego would lend itself towards self-love or development. Pride or punishment of that system would be guilt and inferiority. And most people are working towards an internal secure system of self-love, and feeling inferior or guilty is not moving towards the secure part of themselves. So looking at his psychosexual stages of development, I'm not going to read through all of those. You can read that in your book. It is a couple of pages. But I would encourage you to look at that and recognize the contributions that are coming to play with those stages. And keep in mind that the development of conceptual framework as Freud as a theorist, and processing possible conflicts that might come up. And again, the transference that he spoke of. So I kind of skipped through the psychosexual stages, moving into just reminding you that he did contribute quite a bit to the framework. I'm just not going to read through all of those. He also taught that as a child, not having developed fully in a particular stage of those psychosexual developmental stages, that they may become fixated on a particular stage. So keep that in mind as you're researching and you're looking at what did he mean by that, and looking towards those personality traits that are associated with those stages as you keep pulling through your theories. Also, keeping in mind that Erikson is not in this particular unit that we're talking about, psychoanalysis and Adlerian. However, he did continue on from Freud that developmental stages, but he started changing. He started making those changes from the psychosexual into more developmental stages, and they parted ways from that particular research. So, and that's an interesting piece to look at, of where Freud was and then moving into those developmental stages. It is interesting research. And lastly, looking at defense mechanisms. This is a concept that we've heard. These are phrases that we hear. People use that phrase often as a defense mechanism this person has. So that is a contributing factor, as you can hear, that Freud brought in many, many years ago. And that's an important piece for us to look at as a contributing piece of counseling and the psychoanalysis. Now, he may have looked at it as repression or the pushing away, defense mechanisms being a repression, and the unconsciousness or unconscious thought or being in denial, refusing to accept maybe reality, and then projecting on. So again, that transference or attributing things or thoughts to something or somebody else. So we're looking at that transference as a contributing piece as well as the defense mechanisms. And transference doesn't always have to be negative, by the way. I think we hear it oftentimes in a negative connotation, but I want you to keep in mind that in this regard, it is negative, but there are times where transference isn't always a bad thing, but we want to be cautious of it and put a flag so that you're aware that that's being transferred onto you as the counselor. All right, so as we look at what we want to take away from understanding the psychoanalytic approach for this portion of looking at Freud, we want to see his significant contributing factors to the field, that his work has provided us with conceptual framework, behaviors, and understanding the origins and functions for our clients. And sometimes before, when we're helping bring that to clients, we're helping them understand and recognize that for themselves as behaviors and the origins or functions of that, maybe even the maladaptive behaviors. So that is a contributing factor, us looking back and then not blaming their past, where he would sit there probably for some time in terms of a client's past, that being the main focus for Freud. We would probably look at it, and then if you're choosing that particular theory, and then look at moving into a different space with your client. But if you're staying in that psychoanalytic like him, you're going to sit there with them in that past and that contribution that has on their current. Some other contributing factors to keep in mind, that we're going through all the theories, and not to throw them all away, even if you disagree with some of the points or some of the contributing pieces. A lot of times Freud's head's gotten some negative press, if you will. And so don't throw it all away. Definitely look at it and piece apart as you're creating your own theory and the project that you're writing for this class, and what those contributing factors are and how it overall is a contribution. And he did a lot of work for the field of psychotherapy and counseling. And we want to move towards looking at the contributing factors or core concepts for Adler's individual psychology. And striving for significance. So what he meant by striving for significance or having superiority, not necessarily feeling superior from others, but having that internal mechanism of feeling significant, or that you're making contribution. So a lot of what Freud would have brought or forward was that everything was this intrinsic thought. It all comes from you and your past. And Adler kind of brings out an individual piece, or even how our community, our social aspects influence us. And he also had a little bit of different view on those stages of life, that 0 to 6 was the most impacting for the development of anyone, of a human. Those ages, that is. So the 4 characteristics to move through of self, and then the social interests, connecting to our community, and that's that individuals are wanting to connect to humankind, to make a difference, to feel like they belong, that they have a home in the world or the community that they're living in. And as a Christian, you can take that mindset, and other religions do a similar process of that. Being part of that connection in your community as a whole is super important. And that's an important piece that you can pull through as well as you're working on your theories project, is looking at that integration piece and how community is impacting the mindset, I guess you could say, of that religious piece. In more familiar terms would be the family constellation, and looking at family systems, and what the term has been changed. Birth order is the same. There's a lot of research on birth orders. Very interesting, a little bit tricky in terms of a lot of times some authors are going to say that birth order is exactly right. But you'll see nuances between family systems with birth order. And it kind of depends on, age gaps between the families, or if it's a blended family and things like that. Also, Adler's going to look more at establishing a therapeutic relationship and encouraging your clients, and not just about it being the separation of I'm the professional and you don't know anything, which may have been more of a Freudian look at how psychoanalysis, but bringing it back down to more encouragement and wanting them to strive towards significance and feeling that internal superiority, and not negatively, not in an arrogant way, but more a positive fulfillment kind of way. And then also keeping in mind how he's contributed to the counseling approaches and family therapy, that it can be considered one of the first to do family therapy at all. So as we compare the two, Freud saying that you have determinism, which is the past focus. Adler saying that it's a future focus. Freud would say that everything is built from childhood throughout, and we can get stuck there and kind of develop maladaptively through the stages, where Adler would say that we have these stages, but we can develop really early on, those 0 to 6 years, and move forward out of the development of foundation of having goals, and that more intrinsic, I'll use the word value of self. They didn't implement the word value. And then Freud says that interpersonal drives versus Adler's society, interest, and community is what is driving. Freud, everything that is internal systems. Adler saying that we contribute to feel like we're giving back, and that's how we feel connected, or that we belong. Freud says that the biological instinct is there. So back to the id, ego, and superego. I realize I could have gotten your slides right there too. And then Adler's going to move towards a more collaborative within the family system, that's the intrinsic piece of self. Lastly, Freud's fixation or psychosexual stages, where Adler's actually psychosocial, and the early recollections of family systems are more of a whole healthy family system. And just as you guys keep in mind, you may have already, as you're reading, that the family systems that they're talking about are very traditional, mother, father, male, female, and in a multicultural stance. As you all have been learning about multicultural in your foundations course, that we're not looking at the family system as the same. We can still have a systems view, but when you're reading from these particular theorists, they were not talking about the family systems that we would have today. And lastly, we want to remind you just to keep reading, answering your discussion questions, using your peers for feedback, and networking with these discussion questions is a great place for you to get to know each other. And we'll have Zoom meetings as necessary. Lastly, here are your references of your book and the scripture, Ephesians 5:21, that we discussed earlier regarding others. That was a paraphrase. And I look forward to working with you this term. I hope that it goes well. Reach out to us for any questions, and we will see you soon. Thank you.